Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri U.S. Pie's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sheri delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few. Back with me today is actress, film producer, and author Sam Sorbo. She's here to discuss an opinion editorial published in the Washington Times that we co-wrote. It's titled, Restoring Parental Authority in Education Starts with Ending Federal Control. Before we dive into today's conversation, be sure to give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and visit uspie.org to learn more and join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. U.S. Pie's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at US Pie on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and today we're going to talk about something that could truly transform American education and restore parental authority. Joining me again is my friend and fellow warrior for education freedom, Sam Sorbo. You probably know Sam as a speaker, author, and tireless advocate for home education. She's also the founder and president of They're Your Kids Foundation. They're Your Kids Education Foundation. Sam and I recently co-authored an opinion editorial that was published in the Washington Times titled, Restoring Parental Authority in Education Starts with Ending Federal Control. Today, we're going to unpack exactly what we said and why this message matters more than ever. Sam Sorbo, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here with you, Sheri.
Yes, and I'm so glad you made the time for us. I know you're a very busy woman. Before we get into the opinion editorial, I'd like for you to bring us up to date with your latest work. You've been very busy lately, haven't you?
Yeah. So last week we had a press conference on the steps of the Capitol for Parents Demanding Justice Alliance, which is a group that I formed together with Kelly Walker, who is probably the OG of injured parents whose governments targeted them. The school board targeted him, and his city council targeted him because he had a coffee shop, and that gave him a little bit of a platform. And so he was offering kind of a relief for people, a gathering place for people who were upset about how the school was treating the kids. We have a story of a little boy who really didn't want to wear the mask, and he pulled it off his face and he threw it in the garbage in the nurse's office. And she made him take it out of the garbage and put it back on his face. And then the parents were then targeted by local law enforcement. So this is all stemming from the letter that the National School Board Association sent to Merrick Garland saying, you need to treat parents who are speaking out at school board meetings because they're so violent. They need to be treated like domestic terrorists. And Merrick Garland took it upon himself to change the tenor and look upon parents as though they were violent. They were not, and treat them that way. And he engaged the FBI, and then the FBI engaged local law enforcement to go after these parents who literally were not at all violent, just expressing a difference of opinion. I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen sort of the story of the school board that just walks out while one parent is talking. There's the school board members that are like doing on their phones while people are talking. And while I don't condone that behavior, it's easy enough to just sit there and take it and not do anything and disregard it. But instead, they became punitive. They went after these parents. They ruined some of their lives. They went after their jobs. They called their employers. They called their employees. So Kelly had a coffee shop. His employees began to get death threats because he was speaking at the school or just actually keeping his shop open. A lot of people came down on him for that. So we are representing those parents. And the reason that this is so important is because parental involvement is the number one predictor of academic success for a student. So we must be for parental involvement. We must be desirous of parental involvement. And the schools that don't want parents to be involved are not interested in the education and welfare of those children, clearly. And so because now we have so many, I mean, remember Terry McAuliffe said that it was not at all the purview of the parents to have any say in how their children were being educated. So there's a mindset in the culture of our schools today that disregards parents, sidelines them, tries to ouster them from the conversation, and this cannot stand. And between you and me, I'm pushing, or I should say, we are pushing for an executive order. We're running that up the flagpole, so to speak. We are speaking with the Department of Justice, the Weaponization Working Group, the Department of Education also, as well as the Domestic Policy Office in the West Wing, to try to get an executive order, first of all, acknowledging that these parents are currently, still today, being harmed. One of the parents that spoke at the press conference that we just had went home to further attacks because they saw her speaking at the press conference. So we want an acknowledgement that these parents exist, that they are still being targeted today. We would like, I'm thinking, a ceremony applauding their behavior and saying, this is the kind of parenting we want. We want involved parents. We want parents to stand up for their kids. We want the schools to be in a dialogue with the parents. And then personally, I'm pushing for school boards comprised of only parents of children within that particular school. I would like to see that. So school boards are like extremely local because, as you know, all politics is local, and we should localize these decisions to the schools themselves, instead of having sort of countywide and things like that. So that's what I'm working on. I'm doing a lot of PR for that, trying to get the word out, because people think, oh yeah, I remember when that was happening, but it's not happening anymore. And what I want people to understand is you think it's not happening anymore because you're not seeing it in the news. But number one, it is still happening. And number two, the reason that you're not seeing that much of it is because it was, in fact, an intimidation campaign to get people to get parents in particular to sit down and shut up. And we have the receipts now. We have Merrick Garland being advised by people in the DOJ telling him, this is kind of, you're kind of stomping on people's First Amendment rights here. You probably shouldn't be doing this. And he's all like, well, that's okay. I don't care because I just want them to sit down and shut up. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but my point is we have the receipts, and he was actually in collusion with the Biden White House to do this to these parents. So, and the reason that they were doing it to the parents is because they wanted to intimidate the rest of them. So while these parents took the slings and arrows, the rest of them have been silenced and their voices have been ignored, basically.
So I've been following your work, and of course, you sent me something about it when you first you had your first press conference. I think that was your second, and I'm just really impressed. And then the timing, of the evidence that came forth just a few days ago. I mean, it's just
Exactly.
perfectly paired. I don't know if you planned that, but
No.
it was whatever the God planned that. Then it was perfect timing. So I'm really excited about your work in this. There's a lot of parents that we've talked to over the last few years that have been targeted. One of our by presidents in Chicago, Illinois, has lost his job, and just so many things. I'm trying to get him on the podcast to talk about his situation, and I'll definitely refer him to your organization because he has a very strong story.
To
One,
that end, if you'll allow me to interject,
sure.
if a parent is listening to this and they're saying and they're identifying, right? They came after me too. Please just go to realfreedomtalk.com. We have a form to submit online. It's very easy, very simple. Just to tell your story. Broad strokes is fine, but we are still compiling our dossier. We have a dossier, that we released at the press conference of over 40 names, or some of the names we redacted because some of these people are still being persecuted as we've pointed out, and so some of them wanted their names out there and some didn't, and but telling their stories, because the stories are incredibly egregious. I mean, there was a school board member who decided he didn't like the parent who spoke at the school board meeting. And so he called local law enforcement and said he is banished from school property. Off with his head. I mean, Queen of Hearts, anyone? Like, this little petty tyrant prevented this dad from picking his son up after school. They arrested him for trespassing because he went to pick the boy up after school. This is not acceptable by any measure. They do not own our children, and we don't co parent with them.
Amen. Amen. We had an incident like that here in South Carolina, in a county right next to mine, where there were a couple of parents that were served with no trespassing orders because they spoke out at school board meeting. So I'm so glad that we're talking about this today, so that the audience can go to your website. Again, that was Freedom
Re-
Talk,
realfreedomtalk.com.
Real Freedom Talk, realfreedomtalk.com. So important for everyone who's been affected by the weaponization of the government, for the parents to go to this website and share their story. Obviously, the more, the better, the more effective it's going to be. One other point I'd like to make on that, if I could, Sam, is I would recommend, I love your idea of promoting school boards that are only parents of children in the district. But one thing I would add to that from, from my experience working with school boards is you should also say that aren't teachers or are not employed by the district, because they'll just fill the board with people from the district and teachers and others that are also parents. I've had that happen
Yeah,
when we
it's an
suggested
interesting
something
thing
similar.
because I think that that would represent a conflict of interests.
You would think.
No,
Yes,
I
I
know.
agree. So, okay, good stuff. You're doing really great stuff. And so, if you don't mind, now we'll talk a little bit about the opinion editorial that we authored together. So, the greatest concern, or the core concern of the letter, was the fact that the federal involvement in education has just been an utter failure. So, what would you say this federal control has produced, and why is it time for a complete reset?
Well, I mean, if we go back 100 years, or maybe a little bit over 100 years, we had a 100% literacy rate. And I'm not saying that everybody could read see John Run. I'm saying people read Dickens and Shakespeare and Mark Twain, and they read good literature. They could read the Declaration of Independence and understand it with one pass. And we can't do that anymore. And that's because of school. So when you look at it just from that standpoint, school is has precipitated a tremendous decline in our ability to read, which is our ability to think, it's our ability to imagine, it's the entrepreneurial spirit that they're killing. And that's because they instituted factory schools. So if you want to step back to the 1970s, when they founded the Department of Education, and it's only been downhill since then. When school first started, some schools did well, some schools didn't do well, and it was sort of it was a little rocky, right? But always sort of a gradual decline. But then we have the federal Department of Education, and we just plummeted in our ability, and now we're 40th in the world. And people are saying, well, we have to fix it. Well, the first thing is to defund the Department of Education and get that out of there. And I don't see why that's so controversial. It's not been successful. And when something's not successful, you should cease doing it. But in our government, it seems like if it's not successful, throw more money at it. That seems to be their mantra. So I think that that's sort of the first step. And then, well, you can take it from here if you want.
Okay, so the title of the opinion editorial is Restoring Parental Authority, and it starts with ending federal control. So, you've referenced the importance of parental involvement in your work with the project that you were just talking about, and it is so critical. And so, some of the statistics that we pointed out in the article were that 40% of fourth graders, according to the latest NAEP scores, 40% are below basic. So below the
Right.
lowest, rung, they're on the lowest rung, 40%. It's outrageous. I'm actually interviewing a teacher this afternoon who's going to talk about her sixth grade students who can't read and write. And
But the but what we
it's
have to
just
understand is basic is a lie.
right.
Basic is a lie because basic used to be something meaningful. Now basic is they can recognize letters or something,
Mhm.
right? It's like
Right.
lower than low. In the
Right.
state of Ohio, I know that for at least eighth grade, I think it's eighth grade, a 38% test score was proficient. Well, that's not proficient by anybody's standards. So they redefine proficient, they redefine basic so that they can apply it to kids, but it doesn't mean what it used to. So so if we go to really the thrust of the article, which is to try to restore parental control, because parental involvement is the number one predictor of academic success, then of course you start from the top. And the reason that you do that is because, look, we've been trained in our schooling to trust the government. And so what's happened is parents have sort of offloaded their responsibility to parent their children to the schools. And if you start by dismantling the federal control of the schools, then at least some of that control reverts back to the states, becomes a little bit more local, and maybe that will encourage parents to re-engage. But I would say that we still need, for instance, Parents Demanding Justice Alliance, because the federal government is the one that targeted the parents. The federal government. And in fact, I've been talking to some people. It's possible that we have a class action lawsuit now against the federal government because of what Merrick Garland and the FBI did. A lot of these parents were targeted by their local law enforcement. But the reason, and that was sort of the FBI kind of outsourcing their dirty work, let's say. And so it makes it very difficult for these parents to get any kind of justice locally because they were targeted locally. So Kelly Walker, who's my partner, he has an arrest on his record. They threw out the arrest, but they haven't taken it off his record yet. Try getting a job with an arrest on your record, right? So
Right.
and they're not taking it off because locally they don't care. They're doing that punitively, right?
Right.
But he may actually have part in a class action lawsuit against the federal government because now we have the documents indicating that Merrick Garland was conspiring with the Biden White House and the FBI to do this, but also to put it on the local level so that it didn't get back to them. So we shall see.
So the other point that we make is that, in our opinion editorial, is that the Constitution doesn't give any authority to the federal government over education. And so, why would you say that's so important in making our case? And how did we stray from that principle?
Yeah. Yeah, how did we stray from that principle? I mean, it's completely unconstitutional. Somebody should have just challenged it to the Supreme Court and said it's unconstitutional. We shouldn't have it. Read the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say federal government has the authority to erect a Department of Education. And it does say any powers that are not uh, 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 what's given to the federal government by this document are reserved to the states. So that's why the states all have um, education in their charter. Most of the, I think they all have education in their charters. I can't remember exactly. And so, which is too bad because the states actually shouldn't be involved in education either. The only reason that the founders would have supported state-run education would be for the dissemination of morality, but they don't teach morality anymore. And so we have a lawless culture because we're teaching literally the opposite of morality in our schools. So yes, the Department of Education is completely unconstitutional. It should not exist. It should never have existed. And Trump is actually making headway in dismantling it. So he fired, or through Linda McMahon, they fired close to 1,400 employees of the Federal Department of Education, which does nothing in terms of educating children. It's literally pencil pushers. It's a bureaucracy, just, passing papers around. So they fired 1,400 of them. Well, that was challenged because leftists want the Department of Education because they seek the destruction of children, I guess. Anyway, it was challenged all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was argued in front of the Supreme Court, and they lost. And so they view now that Trump is absolutely constitutionally acting when he fired those employees. Thank goodness. They should have just challenged the existence of the Department of Education, but I guess they didn't want to get too greedy. So we fired 1,400 employees. Meanwhile, in the great state of Illinois, Chicago spent too much money on illegals. And so they have to cut the budget for the schools, and they will be firing 1,400 teachers who actually, if you believe in school, actually do affect the education of children. And many of them, I think more than half of them, are special ed teachers. And they're being fired. Nobody's challenging that because they misspent the money. So I've got no patience with these people.
Oh, I don't blame you. I have very little patience myself for them. So we also know that outside of the lack of academic achievement, that the government schools or the system is hurting children and eroding parental rights. It's affecting faith and families. And so how would you respond to that, Sam?
Well, I mean, we've seen, look, they're targeting parents. The chutzpah, the tremendous hubris that takes. But more than that, because they have effectively, for the most part, most parents are not at all engaged in the school educating their children. So they don't have their eye on the ball. They're not looking at the books that are coming home. They're not looking at the books in the classroom. They're not interviewing the teachers, which is crazy to me. It's crazy to me, even though I did it personally when I dropped my son off at school. I'm like, I can't believe I just dropped my son off with an absolute stranger that people say is a very nice person. How do you know she's a nice person? Did I tell you the story of my son's first grade teacher? When I found, by the way, so they assign the teachers the day before classes start because they don't want any flack from the parents. You get what you get and you don't complain. You don't throw a fit, right? And so he was assigned, I don't know, Miss Smith, right? And my friend called me to tell me, oh, your son got Miss Smith. She's wonderful. Everybody loves her. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. I got a good one. Lucky me, which is to me now thinking about this just crazy. And the next day we dutifully walked my little boy, my pride and joy, down the hall to meet Miss Smith. And he went into her classroom and he spent a year, a school year with her. And then during second grade, I started to see a pattern of teachers who, as engaged as they were, it's just a job to them. They're just going and punching a paycheck, punching a time clock, and they're teaching. It's not that they're not teaching, but they're it is what it is. It's just fine. It's not the best. How could it possibly be the best? She's got 30 kids or 25 kids in her class. So it is what it is. He became like a little widget. Like, she had 5 minutes for him and 5 minutes for each of the other kids. But what I figured out is the reason that she was the favorite teacher, that people loved her so much. And it wasn't because she was a good teacher. It was because she kept a bowl of candy. And in that bowl of candy, if you went to her classroom from any grade and gave her a hug, she would give you a bowl of candy. She would give you a piece of candy from the bowl. You could pick a piece of candy. And of course, the kids loved that. And so they loved her. And so she gained this reputation of being just the best teacher. And part of this is a reflection on us, because my friend who told me, "Oh, you got the best teacher," she'd been in that school for 3 kids all the way through. So 5 years for each child, a total of whatever, 10 years, because they overlapped, right? And she knew that this teacher was the best. Everybody loved the teacher. But she never took a step back and thought, I wonder why everybody loves her. Like, I like her. She's nice. Is my son like doing super well in first grade? And by the way, like, there's a lot of passes: first grade, second grade, third grade. None of it's that important. You just want your kid to know how to read. You have no idea if they know how to read well. You have nothing to compare it to, because maybe he's a little bit better than your firstborn or whatever, but we don't really have the knowledge base to make judgment calls. And what I'm pointing out is, because we went to school, we actually lack the knowledge base to know that we lack the knowledge base. And so we just go, "Oh, she's the good one. Excellent. That's enough for me. Somebody tells me that she's beloved. I guess that should do it for me." And so for a year, my son went to class with her. Wasn't anything spectacular, but what do I know? And I never looked at the books that she had in the classroom. And by the way, folks, now you really have to look at the books that they have in the classroom. Um, and I was in a fairly conservative leaning, a lot of leftists, but also, very conservatives, a lot of them too. And so it was, relatively safe, if you want to say, but we just we go because we've been trained. We've been trained by our own schooling that school is good. And then we send our kids because that's what our parents did. And that's all we know. And we lack discernment, because we were never taught discernment in school, to sort of question the narrative. And so at the end of second grade, there were some things that were kind of really ticking me off about what was happening. Um, they were silly things, but book reports. I didn't really enjoy doing book report with my son, and I thought their form was kind of dumb, and he didn't enjoy it. And it was hard at the end of the day when we were both cranky and hungry and tired, and so that, and then the teacher assigned some stuff that I was like, why is she doing this to me? I took it kind of personally, and I don't see why I shouldn't have. She gave it to me, right? And so I just started wondering, like, is this really the best for my boy? Like, maybe we could do better than this. And that was a good school. We moved there for that school. So while they didn't like keep me out of the classroom, in fact, I was a very engaged parent, but I was like one of 3 engaged parents. The rest of them were like drop off, pick up, drop off, pick up. They might go to the PTA meeting, or they might go to the bake sale, or they might do the little marathon, the little whatever fundraiser. But most parents have been trained, and the teachers train them too. "Oh, don't worry about a thing. We'll take care of it." The teachers train them, because they don't need the flack. They don't need pushback. They don't want questions. Their lives are so much simpler if we just drop off and leave them and then pick them up at the end of the day.
Amen to that too. So, yeah, and then if you add to that, their lives are much better off if we medicate them so they're not a problem in schools. And of course, there's just so much wrong with government schools today. Of course, that we don't recommend anyone have their children in government schools because it's just become toxic. So that's a great example, and that's probably what 15 years ago or so for you, that and things have just gotten so much worse since that
What's weird,
time.
what's weird is when you talk about the rise in the ADD and ADHD treatments. What has happened to men that little boys can't sit still anymore? And I say anymore, like a joke, because when somebody describes their son who is like bouncing off walls and running around and hitting things with sticks, I'm like, so he's a boy? Like, he's a boy. And we're
Hmm.
forcing little boys to sit still for hours on end. How dare we? How
Right.
dare we institutionalize these healthy children? It's a terrible travesty that that we've been trained to believe that we're doing the right thing for our children by submitting that to this kind of torture, when it's entirely unnecessary. Entirely unnecessary. Okay, if your son doesn't read before the age of 8, that's fine. He can learn to read at 8, and he'll learn to read in a week. Like, you don't have to like belabor the issue and like, work on the letters and work on the sounds and whatever. You don't have to. If they're interested in it, do it because they're interested. The kids love to learn, so give them what they want to learn. But, we get all weirded out over what if my child is behind? Sheri, you have a podcast. I have a podcast. But I had a podcast. I did radio before I did a podcast. You've never done radio. Are you behind? Are you behind me? Is that how that works? This concept
Mm,
of will my child be behind is so absurd when you just dig into it and try to understand it. And it just proves that we're just completely brainwashed because we're so vulnerable when we have kids, are we not? We're so vulnerable
yes.
to the messaging in the culture. And, what if your child, falls behind? And you got to get those well checks. The kid's well. He doesn't need to be checked if he's healthy, right? But no, we're trained. You got to go get those well checks. And you know what the well checks are about? They're about sticking your kid with a needle,
Vaccines,
because
yes.
somebody's making bank. And we're
Hmm.
we're slowly now starting to wake up and go, oh, wait a minute. So they're just conflict of interest everywhere, everywhere.
Absolutely. And the education system, the government education system, is a huge money making industry.
Mm.
And of course, you've just touched on another industry that's
Yes.
probably one of the
Oh,
the
yeah.
biggest in the country is the pharmaceutical companies, and they're all
Right.
over our kids. The mandatory vaccine schedule, of course, the forced COVID jabs,
And they're in
and
cahoots, right? Because you can't go to school
absolutely,
unless you have all your vaxes done.
that's right. And so
So
the
they're in
government makes
cahoots with
that
each
decision.
other.
Well, I remember when the HPV vaccine came out, Gardasil. Gosh, that's dating me too, because that's probably 15, 20 years ago. And I was lobbying against it in our state because they wanted to put it on the mandatory vaccine schedule. And we're talking about a vaccine against a sexually transmitted disease. All the other vaccines at that time were with communicable diseases. Well, you can't catch a sexually transmitted disease in the classroom. At least you couldn't when I was in school. Who knows today? But nonetheless, it was ridiculous. And I'm just so glad so many parents are waking up. Um, April, for example, my daughter-in-law, um, our youngest granddaughter, 5 years old, has had 0 vaccines, not a one. Now they didn't know enough with the first grandchild, but she only had like 1 or 2, and then she had trouble finding a doctor, a pediatrician that would see her children without the vaccine. So
Yeah.
yes, they're in cahoots. The medical
I
community, the
think
pharmaceutical community, the government schools.
so. Just so in case people don't, excuse me, in case people don't understand, the pediatricians are incentivized with big bonuses if they achieve 100% vaccination, 100% vaccination rates with all of their patients. And so if a pediatrician wants the bonus, he's got to kind of cook the books to keep patients who don't want their kids vaccinated for whatever. And you have to be 100% or it's nothing. And so, yes, it would be very difficult now. And I've known too many stories of pediatricians who have dropped patients. Well, then I'm not
Hmm.
treating you, which
Right.
is, what about medical freedom? Nope, doesn't work here, not in my practice. Like, that's scary. And yes, the school system is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. But let's not call it an education system anymore. Can we do that? Can we agree that it's no longer an education system if it ever was one?
And we're calling it schooling.
Yes, it's a school
Okay.
system. It's a
Yes.
system of schools
Right.
that fail
Right.
to
And
educate. I mean,
many
come
of my
on, come
guests
on,
are,
let's give up the ghost. It doesn't educate.
yeah,
They don't educate. They do the opposite of
right.
educate.
Exactly. They indoctrinate, in fact. Um, So yeah, a lot of my guests recently have been helping me to change my vernacular. So I have adopted some of yours from our last interview, and some
Right.
of them are picking up on mine as well. You know,
Good.
like you and I both, I think, call them government schools. So people are starting to catch on to that and
Right.
get away from the old public school thing.
Public
Call
schools.
them what they really are. So, Sam, this is a great conversation, but we need to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll go over some of the other points from our opinion editorial. So don't go away. I'll be right back with Sam Sorbo. A Michigan high school recently approved an expressly pro-Hamas position for a student debate while turning down the option to present a pro-Israel perspective, in effect endorsing arguments in defense of an international terrorist group. A New York City elementary school engaged in Jewish erasure when a classroom map of the Middle East identified all countries except Israel, which was labeled Palestine. Incidents like these illustrate how the indoctrination of impressionable minds leads to anarchy, evidenced by an increase in anti-Semitic activity on college campuses by students who have been radicalized. U.S. Parents Involved in Education believes that the next generation must be rescued by restoring education to its local roots controlled by parents. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. With me today is Sam Sorbo, and we're discussing, among many other things, our joint opinion editorial entitled Restoring Parental Authority in Education Starts with Ending Federal Control. So, Sam, we made it very clear in our editorial that we don't just want to trim the U.S. Department of Education or move it around, which is what we see in some of the legislation that's been proposed, just moving things to other federal agencies, the programs that is. So you and I want to abolish it completely. So why do you think that that's so important that we shut it down entirely instead of just
Well, it doesn't
repackaging
do
it?
anything. So it's a clearinghouse for the loans program for student loans for college, which really should be privatized because when the government lends money, it doesn't care about who it's lending money to or for what. It just knows that it's going to own you for the rest of your life, so that's okay. And it's a bit of a conundrum, Sherry, because kids are are indoctrinated, brainwashed, K through 12, 13 years to go to college. Spend whatever college costs because college is so important, right? And by the way, this is an interesting statistic that I just read yesterday. 25% of Gen Z regret going to college. So we're moving in the right direction. But in any case, all of these kids were convinced to go to college and spend whatever, borrow whatever to just get a degree. There's no quality of the degree. That was never discussed. It was just go to college to get a degree. Now they can't get jobs. And so they've borrowed all this money and they can't afford it. They can't afford to pay it off. And so they go back to the government. Hey, government, bail me out. Okay. Well, the problem is this, the government is the one that taught them to go borrow the money. So it's a big grift that the educators have perpetrated against the US taxpayer, basically, because they had the kids for 13 years to convince them to go and borrow the money to give to the universities for God knows what. And then the students are like, hey, I can't afford to pay this off. Government, bail me out. So government just basically wrote a blank check to the universities based on the schools training the kids to effectuate that. I mean, it's horrendous. And we still haven't, I don't think anybody's speaking of this like this. We still haven't woken up to that. So that's more waking up that we're going to have to do. But Gen Z, 25% of them apparently are regretting having gone to college for whatever reason, either what they studied doesn't work for them or they spent too much money or whatever. So that's one of the programs that the Department of Education oversees very poorly, right? So that needs to go.
Right.
It shouldn't just be moved. I look, I like the GI Bill. I think that it was very useful when it first came around. If we privatize student loans, I think that we can make the case for a meritocracy, which is what it should be, and you can earn, the scholarship funding or the loan funding, and it will force the young people going to college to choose career paths that would have enabled them to pay it back, because the lender's not going to give them the money if they're choosing, French mid-century basket weaving or whatever. So there's that. There is the special, they do a lot for special ed. That's going to be outsourced to another bureaucracy. It should be all state run, but because the government is sort of in the business of trying to even things out between states, and so this state doesn't have enough revenue, but this state has more revenue, and so they sort of even the playing field, and they send a little bit of money to the state that has less revenue and needs some help. So that's probably going to stay, unfortunately. But if all we do is end the federal Department of Education, it's at least a step in making the statement that the US government has no business being involved in education or schools.
Absolutely. So,
See what I did there?
right. Yes, very good. Good change up there at the end. So yeah, we talk about the privatization of loans, and a lot of this stems from the U.S. Pie blueprint to close U.S. Ed, which I have a copy of right here, which I
Yep.
know you've read and you've shared with other decision makers, and we're just we're so excited that some lawmakers are even looking at this, and we wrote about that also in our opinion editorial. So the functions of the Department of Ed, as you're describing the programs, a lot of them are just basically overseeing and implementing and providing the funding, dispersing the funding for things that have been instituted through federal law. So that's another thing in our blueprint that we talk about is we've got to repeal all laws that mandate federal involvement in education. So it even goes beyond closing the Department of Ed. We've got to repeal laws like ESSA
Yes.
and the others that are requiring this huge footprint in states for education. So that's all in the blueprint, which the blueprint can be found on our website, uspie.org. And so I hope people are interested will go there. But we talk specifically about a bill in Congress, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But before we do, one of the other things that I know you and I are both passionate about, that we warn about in the opinion editorial, is this idea of school choice and money follows the child. So can you share with our audience why that is dangerous for private schools and home educators?
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. So the government funded schools are failing. They are not accomplishing their mission, and they are entirely funded by government money, and they are under government regulation. So the proposal is for some of that money to be taken from the government schools and placed, because of parents' direction, into schools that the government has approved, right? The government has to approve it if the money's going there. Otherwise, that's taxation without representation. They're just sending money to people, which I know they do, but in this case, they shouldn't, right? And so those people will then take those dollars and go to a private school. But the problem is the private school is now under the jurisdiction of the government again. And so it is no longer a private school. It is perhaps at best a hybrid private public, right? So because the government's money is going into that school, the government will then be able to dictate how that money is spent inside the school. And I know you know this. There are many school providers who would refuse to take government funds because they won't jump through the hoops for the government to accredit them, because they don't believe the government it should be involved in school at all, and so, or education, and so they won't get government accredited. What will happen to them is they will be put out of business because the competition will be too fierce, because we've all been trained to love money. And so when you say to parents, would you take $8,000 for in exchange for the government being able to control the education of your child, most parents don't understand that that's the exchange that they're making. They don't see it as human trafficking. They see it as, oh, the government's giving me money. And because I had a kid, I just won the lottery and I'm going to get this money. And then they send it into the private institutions, which then forces the private institutions to basically become public institutions, which, by the way, like the other reason that you might want to be leery of it is because it's how do I put this? It's leveling the playing field in such a way that the private element of your private school, the thing that made it as desirable to you as it was, in part, was the lack of the children who couldn't afford to go there or their parents couldn't afford, right? And now those children will be able to afford it. And so it will no longer be elite. It will be a public school. So it will destroy all schooling. And I will not hesitate to say, unfortunately, it will destroy education. And that is because all the homeschool, there are a lot of homeschoolers who are saying, heck no, I'm not taking no government funds. And more power to you. God bless you. That's awesome. But there are plenty of homeschoolers who are taking the government money. Now, in the state of Florida, and by the way, there are 12 states that are doing this kind of program, right? Only 12 so far, I think. But there are more. There are more that are considering it, and there is a big push in the conservative community to do this more, to bring it to all the states, because they are short-sighted or they're being fiscally remunerated, right? They've got money in the game, and they're getting money out of the game. In the state of Florida, if you're a homeschooler and you do accept the money, you have to do testing. The first year they said, no, we don't require anything. Just take the money. It's yours. But they did have a website where you only could spend the money. That did actually include buying flat screen TVs. Those were approved. No laptops, though. You couldn't get a Chromebook for your daughter, but you could get a flat screen TV. I'm just saying, and tickets to Disney World if you want, right? In the state of Florida. But the other
Oh
thing
boy.
that happened to you as a homeschooler in the state of Florida is Florida now considers you not a homeschooler. So it will kill homeschooling because the remaining parents will be such a minority that they will have no puissance. They will have no force to them. And the state of Florida is already considering they need better regulations for homeschoolers. And so they will start trying to impose those regulations. And I don't believe it's coincidental that while we have the school choice push, we also have the push on the other side from legislatures to better control homeschoolers. So in the state of Illinois, again, for whatever reason, there's a lot happening in Illinois. They're considering a bill that would regulate homeschoolers to the point where they have to have a college degree in order to educate their children at home, which is absurd. Because if you look at all the statistics, homeschoolers in general test 25% points better on standard testing, which is their metric, not our metric, but theirs. We do better on their metric by 25%. And that is regardless of the parent's level of education. So for them to think that somebody has to be educated in order to educate a child shows just how wrong-headed they are. And in fact, I'll just point out that metric for the performance of homeschoolers vis-a-vis their peers in the minority community, it jumps as much as 42% better. Again, regardless of the parent's level of education. So I think maybe I've gone a little bit off topic, but I think that answered your question.
No, that's great. Good stuff. Good stuff. You shared some things I didn't know, especially, you live in the state of Florida, so you're more familiar with how that's panning out there. And of course, the rest of the conservative states are all looking to Florida and say, well,
I
Florida's doing it,
know.
so, we
And
need
by
to
the
be doing
way,
it.
Sheri, it's
So we
so
need to know.
successful. And so you have to ask, because we haven't been taught to discern. So this is a little lesson. It's so successful. Great. What does that mean? What does success mean? Well, the parents love it.
Right.
Oh, the parents love getting a check in the mail? Color me surprised.
Yeah.
How is that successful for children's outcomes? I thought we were talking about children's education. So the metrics that they're using have
Right.
nothing to do with what we are craving, which is education for children. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. But you will find that all the proponents are talking about how the parents love it. And that is not good enough. It
Yeah.
will kill education. It has to. It has to. The government's involvement in education, in schooling, has killed the schools. So you want more of that. But they're thinking about it the other way. They're going, no, we're taking money from the public schools and we're siphoning it to the private schools. But you're contaminating the private schools with that money. You're further entrenching the government in the system of schooling that we have in the United States. And that will kill schools, and thus it will have to, it just necessarily, it will kill education. It's very sad to me that people, look, I've had this argument with a number of staunch conservative Christian friends. They think that their Christian schools are safe with government money. And I just look at them like, I can't believe how idiotic you're sounding to me right now, that you think that your Christian school is going to be safe when the government decides that LGBT is now the law of the land. It is a vast indoctrination that is happening in this nation, and the staunch conservatives are not immune from it. They're not immune to it. They've also been programmed and indoctrinated, or bought, or they've been bought. That's the only way that I can see it.
Right.
Sadly, I wish that I wish
Yep.
that I had sort of better news. I wish I could say, oh, we're gonna, when we get the money out of the public schools, it'll be clean, but it won't be. It's not clean. It's just as dirty as it is going into the pub. And by the way, like, so the average cost in the United States to school a child by the government is $16,000. And in most of these states, let me just take Florida, for example, you get roughly 8,000, 7,800 or something like that. You get $8,000 per child. Where's the other 8,000 going? School is a tremendous grift. I just wrote an op-ed actually called School is a Grift, and I proved it. There's so much money that's going towards schooling that is not
Yes.
purchasing what it is intended for. It's a grift. This is why in the state of Texas, they have to destroy their textbooks every 3 years. They have to burn their textbooks. Why? Because they got to buy new ones, because you got to keep the textbook manufacturers in business. Nothing's changed, but they got to buy new textbooks every 3 years or whatever. They have them on rotation so that the textbook providers stay in business. It's absurd. But somebody did a contract, and there's money passing underneath, and it's all grift. And we are so dense to it. It's like Ukraine. We just send money. Here's a bunch of money.
Yeah, it's outrageous how much money we spend on education. And in a lot of the states, Sam, and by the way, I need to take another short break. We just could go on and on, I think. But before we do, let me just say that there are a lot of states where they have these money follow the child programs where, I mean, you've made the point that only about half of it's going out of the system. But in our state, in South Carolina, and some others that I've reviewed, there's a separate pot of money for this stuff. So we've got
Yes.
all this money allocated to the government schools, and then we got a
No, this
whole
is
new
true.
billion-dollar bucket that's going to these
Okay, so
voucher
this is
programs. So we're now spending nearly twice as
right.
much on education and
Right,
getting
we're
nothing
doubling
for it.
down. And by the way, I'm glad you brought this up because it reminded me. According to my research, the state of Florida, their money pot for school choice for the ESAs comes from businesses who get like a tax deduction or something. And so that money comes from businesses.
Right.
But because it passes through the government, it's still considered government money. So they sell us
Right.
on one thing, and then they do a quick shell game, and it turns out that it's something entirely different. It's and we're
Yes.
just sitting ducks because we haven't been taught discernment. So we just believe what they tell us. We're like, oh, this sounds really good. Give me $8,000. I talked to a family they have 3 kids, and they said, we're not taking the money. And I said, good for you. And they said, we have 3 kids. That's a substantial amount of money every year, but we're not taking it.
Mm.
And by the way, so that everybody understands, it costs maybe $1,000 a year to home educate your child. Maybe. I mean, it is very low cost. Now, if you have to work, then, and your children are little, then you have some childcare issues, right? But as children become 10, 11, 12, they become very self-sufficient if they are properly raised and trained. And so you don't even have the childcare issue. It is very inexpensive to home educate a child, especially now with the internet. It's crazy. And yeah, so okay, we want to take a break and
Yeah, let's take a quick
nope.
break. I'm sorry. This is such a great interview. But when we come back, we're going to look at the closing points of our opinion editorial. This is real important because it talks about solutions. So don't go away. I'll be back with my interview with Sam Sorbo right after this. In March of 2023, U.S. Parents Involved in Education announced the Millstone of the Month Award, modeled after the Bible verse, Matthew 18:6, which says, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." The Millstone Award is given to people involved in government schools who have committed egregious acts against children. Sadly, there's a recipient every month with multiple finalists, reflective of the tragic state of American education. Recipients of the Millstone of the Month Award can be found at uspi.org under Resources. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. U.S. Parents Involved in Education's mission is to empower parents to break free from federal education influence. To join the movement, visit uspi.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. With me today has been Sam Sorbo, with whom I co-authored an opinion editorial entitled "Restoring Parental Authority in Education Starts with Ending Federal Control." Sam, in our editorial, we urged Congress to support Alabama Congressman Moore's bill, H.R. 2691, to close the U.S. Department of Education. We also propose a friendly amendment to his bill that will allocate to states the aggregate amount of federal individual income taxes in 2 ways. So this is a good, segue into what we were just discussing. So this is a way, perhaps, that can help parents who don't choose government schools. So the first way would be that federal taxpayers with children who choose private or home education would receive a child tax credit equal to the per pupil allocation for each child not attending government schools. And then secondly, the other way that this funding would be dispersed. So we're talking about block grants. And if we were to go with Congressman Moore's bill to block grant money to states, we're suggesting that you would split it up in 2 ways. So it would go to the states according to the per pupil allocation, so it'd be based on how many students they have. And so the federal taxpayers of households with children attending government schools, their money, their per pupil allocation would be block granted to their state. So that whole block of money for all the government school would go to the state, and the other would go individually to parents who don't choose to do government school. So how do you think that this recommendation will protect education freedom?
Well, it's a start, right? It's a start because it disengages federal control. It doesn't disengage state control, but it does disengage federal control. And the idea behind this, folks, is that we are a federation, so the states should be in competition with each other. That was the original design. And so when the federal government just block grants money instead of, or offers tax credits instead of like sending money with strings attached, which is the other way that this looks like it might play out, that disengages the federal, and then the states can do what they want, like Sheri was saying, uh, a lot of the conservative states are looking to Florida to see how successful this program is. Unfortunately, they're seeing it as being successful, but it isn't yet. It isn't for another 10 years. Okay. You cannot judge the educational outcome for at least 10 years of pursuing a program. Come on, so we'll see. I like this idea. That's why we wrote it. And I like the idea of offering parents a tax credit against each child that will not be attending school. And in fact, that incentivizes parents to homeschool without encumbering them with further regulation. Now, the states are, like I said, they're all looking at, well, how else can we regulate? Because that's what they do. They just sit in their little offices and twiddle their thumbs and figure out ways to muck up people's lives. I wanted to mention that I covered this on a live the other day. A friend of mine sent me a letter that they sent home from her school district, and the district was going to have a $67 million shortfall. And 47 million of it was because they miscounted the number of children who had enrolled in the ESAs versus the number of children who were going to school. They double counted them. And I did this whole thing because the letter was, we need parents to help. We can't do this by ourselves. Write your congressman, tell them we really, really need the money. We're not going to fire anybody yet. We don't want to fire anybody, so we're not going to do that, but we don't have the money to continue. And I'm like, so you're fiscally irresponsible. You still want to teach my kids. Like, the whole thing is so ludicrous. And by the way, you knew how many students you were getting. So you knew how much money you deserved. You were just going to take the extra $47 million for the students that you knew you didn't have to serve. Like, the whole thing is so crazy. And they had the audacity to send this letter out to these parents and basically put the fear into them that, oh my gosh, our schools are going to, blow up or whatever because we don't have the money, even though we're not going to fire anybody. I mean, at least Chicago had the temerity to say, yeah, we spent the money on illegals, so now we don't have the money, so we're just gonna fire 1,400 teachers. At least they're being upfront about it. This school district is being so underhanded and manipulative. So anyway, I just find it very funny. The whole thing is a grift. And parents should simply take responsibility for their children, educate them yourselves. It is not that difficult. Here, get my book, Parents Guide to Homeschool, at sorbostudios.com. Parents Guide to Homeschool, available at sorbostudios.com. Very simple read. If you're still on the fence, I'm told that this is like the seminal book for people who are still on the fence about why they should homeschool. This book is why you should homeschool and how easy it is. This book is how to get it done. It's super easy. Children are naturally curious. It's just not that challenging for you to become their navigator or lead learner, if you will.
That's great. Okay, so this has been an amazing interview. I'm so glad you've shared your time with me today, Sam. So before we close this episode, I'm going to ask you 2 questions that I ask all my guests, and you've been a guest before, so you probably remember. First, we'd like to know what concerns you most about what's happening in education today. And Sam, what gives you hope?
So what concerns me most in education today, of course, is the regulations that are coming down after for the homeschoolers, because I don't believe that children are educated in school. So that's not an educational concern. That's a school concern. The regulations that these bureaucrats who have failed so miserably for the past 120 years think that they can tell us what we should be doing is so absurd to me. What's the second question?
What gives you hope?
Oh, what gives me hope? Oh, my kids give me hope.
Amen.
My kids are so smart. And it's only because I schooled them. Okay. I'm the first to admit I didn't do it right. I learned a lot on the way, but they had enough freedom to figure out who they were and to pursue their interests. And so they give me all the hope that I need. And I think that it will be the homeschoolers of this nation that eventually finally turn this around.
Amen. I couldn't agree more. All right. Thank you again so much for coming on the show.
It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. And if this episode encouraged you or challenged you and you learned something, please consider sharing it with a friend. And be sure to visit uspie.org to learn more and join the movement. See you next time.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPI seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPI chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.